The Big Apple is home to some of the world's biggest banks, but are New York's regulators driving them out? From alleged wrongdoing on hiring practices in China, new twists in the foreclosure fiasco, officials continue to put banks in the legal crosshairs, and that has Dick Beauvais shaking his head. He's vice president of equity research at Rafferty Capital. He joins me now along with Andrew Stoltmann, partner at Stoltmann Law Offices, specializing in securities litigation. It's great to see you both. And Dick, this line really caught a lot of people's attention when you said that your view here is that New York won't stop until it's driven the banks out. Do you really feel that way?
Yeah, I do. They're obviously not going to drive all the banks out of New York, but they are driving them out of New York. Think about, where BNY Mellon is. It's been pushing people to Bangalore, India. Goldman Sachs had to add new people. They did it in New Jersey and Utah. Citigroup is now the third largest employer in Singapore, with jobs, all of which could be in the United States, although they have pushed a lot of jobs to South Dakota. Morgan Stanley is pushing jobs to Japan and to China. So if you go company by company, the first thing you recognize is there aren't very many companies. There used to be at least a dozen, banks and brokerage firms that were headquartered in New York that were of great size. They're not there anymore. And of the ones that are left, they are pulling money and jobs out of New York. And why are they doing it? Well, one of the key reasons is because you've had 3 attorney generals in a row who just can't stop suing them. That's
Andrew,
not fair.
I mean, look,
Kelly,
go ahead. I was going to say the point
Kelly,
here is basically that there should be priority and preference for banks, for example, in New York, as opposed to what appears to be a piling on.
That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. I mean, look, if you don't want to pay the fine, don't do the crime. The banks have nobody to blame except themselves. And for them to be pointing their finger and saying, gee, the regulators are beating us up, this is so unfortunate, we're going to move elsewhere. Look, you have yourself to blame. I mean, J.P. Morgan paid $20 billion in fines last year. They have, I believe, 6 Department of Justice investigations. If you don't want to be piled upon, simply don't engage in activity that almost melts down the global worldwide economy. It's that simple.
And Dick, not to mention that the trends of consolidation of the banking industry and globalization are 2 overarching phenomenon that don't necessarily have anything to do with the regulatory action that you've cited.
All right, well, let's take that statement. If you don't want to pay the fine, don't do the crime. And let's take the statement of J.P. Morgan just paying $15 billion in fines. Who created the fine there? Was it the stockholders of J.P. Morgan that created the fraud?
Morgan's conduct.
They didn't create the fine. The problem was done by the people who Washington Mutual. It was done at Bear Stearns. The people who at Washington Mutual and Bear Stearns who committed the crime were not sued in any way, shape, or form. The people who were sued were the shareholders of J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan's shareholders did not commit the crime. So if you believe that those people who committed the crime should pay the fine, why are the shareholders of J.P. Morgan paying for the fines that were for the crimes that were created by Kerry Killinger and Jimmy Kane, neither of whom are you going after? So the net effect is you've made the decision to fine the people who did nothing and to let the people who have committed the crimes go free. So if you believe in, if you want to pay the crime and the fine stuff, you ought to do what you say.
How about a $2 billion fine for the London whale debacle? I agree. The firm shouldn't just have to pay a fine.
That fine was ridiculous. It was made no sense whatsoever.
But they're not going to because the regulators aren't willing to do that. But these banks have nobody to blame but themselves. And to claim that the regulators are too rough on us, give me a break. You almost melted down the global worldwide economy in 2008. And the fact that more of these firms, any of these firms, weren't criminally indicted is absolutely stunning. To simply have to pay the fine is the minimum that you should have to do. And if they don't like it, then move to another country.
Well, first off, the banks did not create the global financial crisis.
Sure they did, Dick.
If you understood economics and finance, you will know that the financial crisis was created by an excess buildup of money.
Then how come J.P. Morgan paid $15 billion in fines for shoddy mortgage practices? How come they paid a massive fine?
They didn't pay him for shoddy mortgage practices that they did. They paid him for shoddy mortgage practices that Washington Mutual did and that Jimmy Kane and Bear Stearns did.
Please.
So the net effect is the net effect, well, the Attorney General said it pretty clearly. These fines were not being applied to J.P. Morgan because of what J.P. Morgan did. It was applied to J.P. Morgan because of what other companies did.
Dick, I will say in this regard, you actually agree with the point that Jed Rakoff has made, which is that by not going after individuals and going after institutions, the entire prosecutorial system has gone completely off track.
Exactly right.
No,
in other words, if people really believed that the people who committed the crimes should be fined for committing those crimes, then they should go after the people who committed
Kelly,
the crimes.
you know what you do,
who
Kelly?
did not
Kelly,
commit the
Kelly, you know
crimes
what you do?
were the
Last
shareholders of J.P. Morgan.
You go after the companies. Look at what happened once Arthur Anderson was criminally indicted for
go
shredding
after the
documents.
companies. You
Look
went
at
after the
what happened to
shareholders of the
other accounting
companies.
firms. We've seen no other shredding scandals
99.5% of the
since
shares
then.
in
You
J.P.
indict the
Morgan
company,
are
you indict the
owned
people who
by
did it,
Go ahead.
and you
individual
fine them.
Finish the
Americans.
point. Yep,
Mr.
finish the
Booby's an
point.
apologist for the securities industry, and I'm sorry, but it's that sort of attitude that led to what happened in 2008, and that's why nothing has changed since 2008 took place.
I'll give you the last word there. Just defend yourself, Mr. Bobet.
All right. Well, to assume that nothing has happened since 2008 means that you have not looked at any of the laws, regulations, or rules that have been put in place since that period of time, which have been stunning in terms of their impact on the consumer and the financial industry.
In the meantime, the actions will speak for themselves. Guys, thank you very much. Come on and talk it out. Important issue.
Thank you, Kelly.
Especially here in New York.